Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Steve Marks, Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees and President of Hannah News Service here in Columbus. It's great to see everyone in the room today, so thank you. We are live streamed today thanks to our live stream partners, the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. We'd also like to thank those of you watching today who purchased a virtual seat. We are very grateful for this support and are able to continue live streaming services in large part because of you. Thank you. Today's forum is sponsored by Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick and American Dairy Association Mid-East. Won't you please help me thank them? And now, please welcome Michael Snyder, Managing Partner at Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick to introduce our forum.
Thank you, Steve. Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick is proud to support the mission of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, where important topics are discussed with the community and everybody is welcome to participate. Today's topic is going to focus on inclusion. And as a lawyer and member of the local bar, I would like to ask that we all take a moment and observe a moment of silence to recognize Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a woman who spent her life working to end discrimination and promote diversity and inclusion throughout her career. I know this is for some people might be a political issue, but I think we can set that aside and have a moment of silence and just recognize what she's done for our country. Thank you. Now on with the program. We are all prone to act on our beliefs, both conscious and unconscious. What we believe is formed by many influences: our childhood experiences, our families, our friends, neighbors, our teachers, coworkers, and our education. Our experiences are mostly homogenized. We stick within our own groups, and thus we're not exposed to diversity of opinions or views unless we make intentional efforts to seek those out and experience views from other folks. What we think we know clouds our vision and prevents us from seeing the entire picture. So if we want to see the entire picture, we have to ask ourselves, what don't we know? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So please welcome the co-authors of Intrinsic Inclusion, Rebooting Your Biased Brain, the president and CEO of Randolph Brown Consulting, Vincent R. Brown, and the founder and CEO of BRBS World LLC, Dr. Janet B. Reid, and a very familiar face, our host, Colleen Marshall.
Thank you. Well, this is going to be quite a conversation because your book, this premise, is that we can reboot our brains. So let's start with the beginning. How did the two of you come up with this concept of taking what some consider to be intrinsic and saying, we're going to redesign your brain?
Well, it started about 5 years ago. I was very blessed to be a trustee of the Ohio State University and ran into a renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Ali Rezai. And as some of you may know, he specializes in putting probes in brains and so forth. And we just jokingly said, Dr. Rezai, can you put a probe in the brain that would make us unbiased? Well, it was a joke. But he said no, not now, but, and he started introducing us to some other scientists who were working in this whole arena of neuroscience. And what we came to know is, and I think the best way to think about it is, many of you know post-traumatic stress syndrome. You know, someone goes to war and they see some horrible things. They come back, and every time a car backfires, they flinch. That's because their brain circuitry has been rewired. If we think about that in a positive way, imagine that people encounter each other in a very positive way. So then when they see those people in the future, their brain is rewired, and instead of moving away from those people who they are unfamiliar with, they move toward them. So the brain is a remarkable organ. So the premise is, yes, you can rewire your brain. The question is how? And that's what started our journey into looking at how that can possibly happen with people who are willing. And we found a lot.
That's the key.
That's the
to
key.
rewire my brain, to reboot the way I think, the way I conceptualize my world and other people. Don't I have to want to do that, Vincent?
Not only do you have to want to do it, it's a hard job. It's not easy. In fact, if it were easy, we would all do it. And oh, by the way, just because you're a good person, air quotes, doesn't mean that you're going to be naturally inclusive. It first starts with really understanding how the brain works. Now, Dr. Reid is a scientist. I am a former personnel person. That tells you how long ago it was called HR. But you've got to start with understanding that our brains just work fast. So if I had started this presentation with this hat on, right, you'd have had some thoughts. Is that fair? Some of you might have said, hey, why has he got a hat on or not? Others might have said, what's that about? Probably if I'd have started with this hat on, and we're up in Buckeye Land, don't you have some thoughts about that? Some probably say, oh, wow, that's an easy win for us. We love them to come up here all the time. Right? You already had a thought. If I had started the presentation with this hat on, you all would have loved whatever I said. See, I'm changing your behavior right now because your mind already is thinking, I'm making a connection in that. And if I had dared start it with this hat, oh my goodness. So here's the point, folks. In less than 7 seconds, we make well over 11 impressions. And the key is, do we choose to act on those or not? Because a lot of those things you can't stop, but what you can do is choose. And that's when rebooting your biased brain comes in.
You know, we always hear that prejudice and bias is taught, especially to children, that children don't see color, children don't care if you're straight or gay, children don't care how much money you have. But hasn't your research also shown that even babies, isn't this something that you concluded, that even infants look for people like them?
That's right. That's right. And the premise now, at least the most common understanding of this is, back in ancient times when we roamed the earth as tribes. So as long as you stayed with your tribe, you got some food, you got some water, things where people loved up on you, et cetera. And imagine were we a tribe even here, and we found a good watering hole out here. We got some water, and we got some fertile land, and some animals and all that, and everything was good. And we all knew each other because, we're all in the same tribe. But if someone else comes over the hill, those of us who survived to be here today were acutely aware of a difference. There's some different people coming up over the hill, and the likelihood of their wanting to take our place by the river and take our animals and so forth, we had to be acutely aware of that as a possibility. So what happened is, over time, as our brains evolved, we developed, you're familiar with the fight or flight. We developed a very acute sense of who was like us and who was different. And different typically meant danger. So even as little babies, when they look up and they see their mother or their father, they see color, they smell, they know who is theirs. And that's why when other people pick the babies up, the babies may cry, right? Because they're already attuned to who their group is, or we call it in-group and out-group, who the in-group is. So this is so deep in us that there is no way to really get rid of it. There's no way to extract it. It's based in what's called the amygdala in the brain. So our premise around rebooting your biased brain is not to get rid of what already is, but to offer an alternative. And that alternative can only be accessed if you pause. And Vincent knows a lot about the power of the pause. So you will definitely, when you see somebody who's different than you, the stereotypes may flow, the cringe may come, but if you just pause long enough, just for an instant, to think that there might be another possibility around who that person is, or what that person is doing, or whether they mean you harm, it makes all the difference in the world. You want to talk about that
Just
pause?
Yeah,
one
tell
other
us
thing,
about the pause.
Yeah.
So the power of the pause, and really, you think about it, as Janet said, you go through all of these things so quickly. For example, right now, very few of us are probably thinking that we're blinking, but that's subconscious. Very few of us are thinking that we're breathing. In fact, if it comes to your conscious mind, there's probably a problem, because that's not supposed to happen. Well, there's a lot of different things that are going on. In fact, 11 million different stimuli are happening right now, but your brain can only prioritize anywhere from 40 to 50. And so what you have to do is have this ability to ask the question, why did I operate that way? If I'm in a boardroom, pause. Why is everyone there looks just like me? Why is everybody there went to the same college that I went to? Why is it that when we look at promotions, they only look like certain people from certain schools, et cetera? It's the power of that 7-second pause that makes the difference. And if I could just add one other thing on the children, because I have 3 grandchildren, and I'm so powerful about that or excited about that. Here's the bottom line, folks. We all see color if you can see. Some of us were taught to say we don't see colors. That's not true. But here's the difference. It's not until we are acculturated that we judge the color. So kids see color. They don't judge it as negative naturally. And that's the power of why it's difficult to be inclusive. And this is what Dr. Reid and I have found. It's not easy, because nature, as Janet has talked about, would have us not be inclusive, because if I'm around people that I'm not normally around, guess what happens to my biology? It changes. All of a sudden, my pulse rate goes up, I perspire, I get more adrenaline. Culture makes it very difficult, how I'm socialized, and how our brains are wired. Oh, and if I didn't mention, guess where stress thrives the most? And bias in the same room. So when we are stressed, bias is flourished. And the workplace and the world we live in today, we are incredibly stressed. And we're incredibly making decisions in 7 seconds. Are you in or out? It just happens that quick.
So if this is intrinsic, organic almost, and you can trace it to the part of our brain, and it's protective, and it's something that we are born with, should we be changing it?
Yeah, so it worked for a while. When we were all separate, again, those separate tribes roaming the earth, and being connected didn't really matter that much. In fact, being disconnected mattered more. But now, as we are so interconnected, I mean, we're texting with people in China. If you haven't noticed, the demographics of the United States are changing, but the demographics of almost every country in the world are changing. People are intermarrying. The Japanese are marrying Chinese. I mean, things you never thought would happen. So the bottom line is, whereas being apart was necessary for survival back then, learning how to be connected is necessary for survival now. But our brain just hasn't evolved to that point. So therefore, we'll never get rid of that piece in the brain. Dr. Rezai said, yeah, we can change our brain in another 3 million years. But what we can do is train ourselves to be able to better connect with people who are different than we, because it's necessary for our businesses, it's necessary for our communities, and every other aspect of our lives.
Let's talk about what the danger is if we don't start rebooting our brains. We have seen in this country a division that is so starkly apparent over the last several months, starting with George Floyd. And one of the things that I thought was remarkably different, because the 3 of us are old enough to have remembered, some of the 60s, and to remember the division and the protests and the Vietnam War, But this time, it looked to me as if the people who took to the streets as part of the Black Lives Movement weren't all black.
Yes, yes.
So but we also saw unrest and a return to the stereotypes from people who were against the Black Lives Matter movement. So is the danger of us not rebooting a continued division?
Go ahead.
I guess you can see we both want to answer that one. Here's the reality, folks. What's happened, particularly with blacks in America, is a 400-year-plus scenario. It's not new. In fact, the Pew Research study, I was just talking about a research study we just saw, talked about racism and is it a priority in America? And they've been asking the same question since 1948. The highest spike was in the 60s, Civil Rights Act. The second highest spike was George Floyd. But here's the scary part for me. It's already starting to come back down. So the reality is it a movement or is it a moment? And I think that's really part of the challenge that we have to talk about is, do we take this as a movement or a moment? And I think the good news is that many younger people and many other people are really getting involved. But if that doesn't continue, right now, and Janet and I were just talking about this, we believe that a lot of that conversation is based on sympathy, but intrinsically inclusive people talk about respectful empathy. And they are very, very different sets of behaviors. So there are things that we need to do, and if we don't do them, then I'm afraid that my 3 grandsons will be experiencing these same conversations as they get older. But the good news, I believe, is we do have a moment to make this truly a movement.
I thought it was telling when you brought up Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because we did lose, in my mind.
Yes.
You know, they teased me at work. I have a bobblehead of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on my desk. But she did so many remarkable things, and I happened to be with my daughter over the weekend, and we were talking about her, and I said, do you realize when your father and I got married, I couldn't get a credit card without his permission. When I was in high school, there was no funding for girls' sports. She did so many remarkable things to change the world for women and minorities. So who do you see as the person we turn to next to do something for those who are typically disenfranchised?
You know, that's the fact that no name popped in my mind.
Yeah.
Is, you know, I think it is.
Or is it us?
Yes, and that's exactly where I'm going. I think it's important to look for leaders, especially those who can impact via legislative moves. You know, things that can benefit all of us. But ultimately, it is us. And that's where I think the concept of intrinsically inclusive people is originating. And I do want to say, you know, pertaining to what you talked about before about how split we are, you know, the dichotomous nature of where it is that we are. Unfortunately, we have lost the ability to have a dialogue with people whose beliefs are different than our own. It's a debate. So it's a matter of my ways are better than yours, and if you espouse this, then I'm here to beat you down with my logic. We've lost the ability to hear. You know, what we do is, you know, what we listen for is the points of weakness in someone else's argument so that we can come and again tell them how they're wrong. Those skills are necessary for business, to be able to hear other opinions, to be able to hear. Those skills are necessary for business, they're necessary for innovation, they're necessary for everything that can make our nation strong. So, intrinsically inclusive people, we started this whole concept by studying those who are naturally inclusive. You know, we wanted to know what are the behaviors of people who just are this way, you know, just are naturally inclusive. And we found 5 behaviors of those types of people. And then our thought was, then how can we generate that in other kinds of people who aren't naturally inclusive. And one of the biggest behaviors that we saw in people who are naturally inclusive is that they're curious. So something like a dichotomous or a fractured nation like what we exist in right now, people who are naturally inclusive want to talk to both sides. You know, their phone has all of the apps, you know, all of the differing apps. They read it all. They look at it all. So to the extent that we, even here, you know, can begin looking at sources of data that are different than what we would agree with naturally, you know, and read all of that. So that's one. Second is they are less afraid. So with George Floyd, a lot of people have said, especially white people have said, I really want to do something. I really want to do something, but I'm afraid I might what? Say what?
The wrong thing.
The wrong thing. Everybody knows this, right? Intrinsically inclusive people are not afraid of saying the wrong thing because they know they can apologize and they know they can learn a lesson. So say something is better than saying nothing, right? And also these people have a tendency to do that power of the pause piece naturally. And the respectful empathy that Vincent talked about, sometimes when people see George Floyd or they have conversations like this, they wind up feeling sorry, especially for African Americans, having to live the duality that we do. You know, what you see of us sitting here, you know, looking sophisticated and, you know, PhDs and degrees and all this kind of business, but we live another life too, you know, and you can feel sorry for that. But to the extent that you feel sympathy, you're not connected. If you see that my fate and your fate are the same fate, then you get connected. And that's where intrinsically inclusive people are. The expression is, if you're coming here to help me, go away. If you're coming here because your fate and my fate are the same fate, then let's stay and make things better.
So how did you go about identifying these people who were intrinsically inclusive? How did you find, I mean, look around this room. Tell me who in this room has no bias, or tell me who you think is intrinsically inclusive. I'm not going to make her really point at anybody. Don't look so afraid. But how did you identify these people to study their behaviors?
Yeah. So I think it's two things. One, first is the power of intrinsically inclusive people is that they are biased.
And they'll say.
And they will say that
They'll
they're
tell you.
biased. That's the thing about it. They're not these special people, but they're special behaviors that they actually start to show. And so what we started to do is to identify people and to identify what were some of those common behaviors that we saw. And so what Janet shared were some of those behaviors. There were some things they also did incredibly well, and it was very subtle. And there were 4 of them. They had this ability, as Janet said earlier, and you'll hear us talk about respectful empathy over and over, but they had this ability to not say, oh, I see your story, I feel your story, but I'm walking in your shoes and now my feet are hurting. That's a different level of empathy. I had a conversation with a white gentleman the other day, and he said, well, how do I get to respectful empathy? I said, what are the names of your 3 sons? He named the names. I said, now I want you to imagine Josh just got pulled over by the police, and for 8 minutes and 47 seconds, all of a sudden, you could start to see the change. Because he wasn't talking about it theoretically. He started to personalize it. How would I feel? And that's respectful empathy. So intrinsically inclusive people have the ability to do that. They have this ability to create connected understanding. They seek information from multiple sides and communicate in ways that everyone can hear. But one of the things that they do that's incredible, and you can almost always spot them, they naturally have more diverse people in their inner circles. Nothing is more powerful than having relationships with people who are different, because that changes your paradigm on all, not just one. So if you never had a person of color who comes to your home, have one come to your home and start building that relationship, and it will also change your paradigm. we have to get beyond what we think we can see. That's very important to who people really are. And one of the things that intrinsically inclusive people do in a way that's very comforting is we call it get behind the curtain. They are able to see you for all the things you are, but they're also explorers to find out what's more than what I don't see. And so if we're doing more and more of that, and then the question is whose job is it? I think there's some major policy things that can take place, but I think organizations like this with corporations, leaders, if you can't control the whole world, please control the environment that you can control. And if we start pausing and asking those questions in the places where we control, we make a big difference. And I also would say, and this is my political statement, that now more than ever, corporations' roles are much more important than they've ever been, in my humble opinion, to create these environments that are inclusive.
You know, if you look at the protests, let's just use as an example the protests that happened here in Columbus. We would talk to one side that said, these are a legitimate taking to the streets to demand equal protection of the law that the Constitution guarantees each and every American. And then there are people who were saying, this is a bunch of damn looters.
Yep.
So they were looking at the same event, sparked by the same events, and taking a completely different take on what it meant and why it was happening. So, as you talk about rebooting our brains, and we talked about this earlier, how do you reboot that kind of a division?
Yeah. So I think it begins with what you said before. People have to want to. So whatever side, you might be on with regard to how the protests manifested, then ask the other side. You think these are a bunch of looters and lunatics, et cetera. Why do you think that? Just have a civil conversation. And hopefully, the people who think that will ask you, well, why do you think this is, as some would say, the American Revolution was a mighty big riot. So why do you think what you think on that side? So you just have that kind of dialogue, but you have to want to. And that's where I'm saying I think we've lost the skill, even the desire, to have a conversation on the other side. I will say that around the rioting, et cetera, as people call it, one part of being biased is to lump everything together. So, the liberals, the conservatives, putting it, and we need to nuance our thinking. So when we think about protests, some people certainly do tear up things, and some don't even, relate to what the cause is. So there's a few of those, of course. Some people, we just took a group through the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati. This is a huge global Fortune 500 corporation, and we took a group of people through the African American experience, 400 years. And we asked them, how would you feel about this, were this your history? And almost 100% said, I'd be mad as HELL. And then we said, well, do you see why some glasses on buildings get smashed in and cars get burned up? Yeah, I'd have burned up the whole city. So when you experience something that's different on a deeper level, you can kind of understand. Even if you don't agree, you can understand. But those people who see property damage, and don't see the majority who are peacefully protesting, then that's an issue as well. Because if you don't see them, then you're looking for something to reconfirm whatever your belief is. So these are things, again, the power of the pause. Yeah. Wherever it is that you are, stop and think about what the other side is. And we even do this, this is, we're professionals in this field, but we have to stop and think, why would it be legitimate that some people would look at protesting as rioting, out of control criminals? And we've had to think about it, and there's some logic to it. There's some logic to that I don't agree with it, but I can see the logic to it because I've had enough dialogue with people who disagree with my opinion.
And if I could just add one other point on that, because this is how culture plays into the bias. And Janet just gave you a great example of confirmation bias. If you go in with a certain objective in your brain, then you're going to probably find the data that's going to support that. It's just that simple. You go buy a new car, right? And you never saw that car. And then all of a sudden, everybody bought that same car because you're confirming, right? Well, here's the bottom line, folks. What happens is in our culture, U.S. culture, generally speaking, is a dichotomous logic culture, either or, up, down, right, wrong. So we automatically go and put them in different sides. That's one way of logic. That's part of our acculturation. Other cultures are more diunital. Both and can be true at the same time. Typically, that's an Asian philosophy, generally speaking. Intrinsically inclusive people have this ability to be more diunital thinkers. They can see both and can be true at the same time, and they're constantly looking for that kind of information.
Yeah, I do want to remind people that in a few minutes, we're going to allow you to come up to the microphone and ask questions. So this is our reminder period that the live stream audience is sending in questions as well. You know, one of the things that I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, and I know you've done all this scientific research on how you can take this hardwire, something you're born with, something intrinsic, and you can change it. You can become different. Have you thought that maybe there's a danger that people will take your research and say, oh, okay, well, my son is gay, I can use conversion therapy. Right. You know, the Vice President of the United States has advocated that. Does this not give them, you know, a platform from scientific research and conclusions that we can take your hardwired brain and make you different?
I think those who think that that might be the case need to read our book. So the bottom line is the book affirms who people really are, you know, who they were born to be, who they are naturally. So there's nothing in becoming intrinsically inclusive, which is really understanding other people versus trying to change somebody or even change, yourself in a way. It's just, how it is that you connect with people who are different than you. So the brain, though, can be changed in some ways, but not in all ways, okay? So some way would be, for example, if, I'm making up this example, but if I have something against short people, because I'm short, so I'll use this example. I have a problem with short people, and my son gets hit by a truck, and a short surgeon saves my son's life, then my brain, I've just had a significant emotional event. So now I look at short people very differently. We've all seen experiences like this where you may have an opinion about somebody and then all of a sudden, boom, they've done something unexpected. So those things can change your brain in terms of how you perceive other people. But we're definitely not advocating changing who it is a person is intrinsically in the first place.
So what should we be doing as we listen to you if we say to ourselves, I think I might have some internal biases and I might look at someone and make a snap decision? Are there exercises? Or is there something that we should be doing right now to make sure that we are more inclusive?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is don't say might. Because you do. We do. I'm saying you do, we do. If you're human, you're biased. It's the way our brains are set up. It's a reality. That, I think, is the first recognition. The moment that we make that recognition, then it's, so what can I do? And again, this whole idea of slowing down, practicing the pause. Oh, here's another secret. Not a secret. Guess what? Our biases are often seen very well by others, even when we can't see them. Okay? So one of the things we can do is surround ourselves by people who will tell us the truth, and we will hear them. And we will not react negatively when they say, yeah, everybody's like, oh, that's way too hard. But that's the reality, folks, because it's easy to see the biases in others. It's so difficult to see it in ourselves. And what we talk about is the hardest work, quite frankly, is the work on us first, and then lead in that way. So surrounding yourself with people who will point out to you, you know what, Vince? And let me just tell you this, for 35 years, to my right is a person who points out all of mine.
And vice versa.
All the time.
And that's why we've been doing work together for 35 years.
Absolutely. But we respect each other and we get each other's perspectives. I mean, we could go on time and time on how we have identified opportunities for us all. And folks, this is truly an ongoing life journey, we believe. You continue to grow, you continue to learn in it. But I also think it's good news, from my opinion, because if we choose, we can be more naturally inclusive. And I honestly believe that that's some of the medicine we need in this country right now, is more people to not only be that way, but to act that way and be very proactive in that.
For a minute there, when you were talking about us taking criticism, I was starting to think this was a work of fiction. Some people don't want to hear that, do they? Jane has some questions. I know she's been getting some online.
I have. And this goes right back to what you said. Can you please repeat the 5 qualities of naturally inclusive people?
Yeah. Okay, so one of them is that natural curiosity. Like I said, they just want to know. They have an interest in that. The second one is that they have less unjustified fear. So if someone were walking down the street who's very different than they, for some of us, we may flinch. For them, they've practiced the power of the pause for so long, they'll let the flinch come, but then they'll say, but then again, there may be something different about this person. In addition to that, they have no fear of having a conversation, making a mistake. They know that they can apologize and so forth. The fourth is that respectful empathy that we talked about. They don't just sympathize, they empathize. The fifth one, which we haven't really talked about much, is they are huge advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, in their recreational life, if they have a faith life. I mean, this is just who they are, and that's in a way how we found some of these people, because we would just ask people, who's a real advocate for diversity, equity, and these names would just fall out. So people know them for how they believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are the 5 different attributes. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Bill Lafayette asks, it seems that various factions are trying to reinforce these inherent feelings of otherness and danger. How do we combat all these messages?
Well, first of all, otherness is not a bad thing. We in the definition of diversity, we are all the same and we're all different. So, it's good, the sameness, because it gives us comfort. It's good, the difference, because it gives us new ideas, innovation, et cetera. So the otherness in and of itself is not a bad thing at all. It's when the otherness is used to truncate the curiosity that we talked about, or to mute conversations that would be had otherwise. That's when that becomes problematic.
And I would just also, when that otherness is considered bad.
Yeah.
When that otherness is considered a negative, that's when it really becomes a challenge. But we need to understand and value our otherness, our experiences. They are different in this world. And we need to be able to honestly talk about those differences and how they impact us and or not. So that is very, very important.
Please introduce yourself and ask us your question.
Sure. Renee Delane from Women Who Dare. And actually, I have 2 questions for you. And I'll ask you the first one first. Can each of you tell us about the other person and with the top 3 adjectives that describe them?
Oh, now you're going to give me 3? So I've had the opportunity to work with Janet for some 35 plus years. She is by far the smartest person I've ever met in my life.
That's recorded.
Period. End of story. Oh, yeah, cut the tape. Sorry. Second thing is she's tough as nails. She's tough. She's tough. And third is she has a heart that's bigger than gold.
And I think, in this world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about a lot of things that we recommend to all of you, but all the things we recommend to you, we do ourselves. So one of the things we have done is explore our thinking diversity between the two of us. And this is an instrument that we use quite frequently, the Hermann brain dominance instrument. And I'm a PhD chemist, so I like numbers, I like stats, I'm very logical, I'm, boom, 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 boom. Woo! Look at the hats, When I saw his little thing of hats, I'm like, oh, man, we're going to do the hats, So, very creative. And I, too, am creative, but he will take more risks, than I, because I'm, this is how I think. I'm more logical, et cetera, in terms of safety. And I don't mean you're not logical.
But I'm not.
But the real deal is, and he's also got a heart that's as big as this, and he's also tough as nails. I think the deal is, anyone who's been around us know that we are night and day. We are extraordinarily different. Although when you look at us, when we travel, people are always like, 2 rooms? They think we're married and have a problem, because we're in 2 rooms. Like, I wouldn't marry this guy, and he wouldn't marry me.
I thought these were the things you liked.
But we have respect.
Did I miss the question?
But this is...
Are we having a whole different conversation here, folks? Is it just me?
But this is the point. We have worked together for 35 years with our differences and with our similarities. And I would say, if you really base it, we probably have more differences than similarities. This is the living example of inclusion. It's not easy. In fact, we fight so much we know each other's lines.
Yeah.
I know when I throw one out, I know what he's going to say, right? But this is the definition of sticking together versus pulling apart over differences. You probably didn't expect that long of an answer for a simple question. But what's your second question?
I will, but I have to preface this by saying I am writing a book called Get Off Your Ask, A-S-K, and you're not going to be in it, but you should be. The question is, at what point, what was the most difficult single issue or topic that you had to work through, the two of you together, to get this book completed?
Wow.
We're back to arguing now.
Okay,
aren't we?
yeah, so you really are trying to see if you can take these 35 years and make it not happen, right? Okay, Dr. Janet Reid is an absolute perfectionist. I mean, she could read 5 million pages of script and find the one comma that was out of order. So, I say that to say, she has edited, and edited the book. And so at some point she was like, okay, Vince, I've edited it again for the 337th time. And I'm like, whatever you say, Janet. Can we just get the book out there? So that is it. But I say that in jest because in reality, we want it to be as tight as possible. So, for me, I probably would have got it out on the first version, first round, and everybody would have been saying, but man, they can't even spell. I mean, but I'd have been so excited about getting it out, and that's just kind of the difference. That's one of them.
Clarence, would you
Thank you.
introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm Clarence Mingo here with Lancaster Colony. And I'll tell you, Mr. Brown, I have a bias towards Mrs. Reid. Short people and I, we connect like right here. So I'm doing that all day. 3-part question for you. I'll be really brief. You mentioned that term duality. And I'm wondering how much you believe that is hindering the conversation around race relations. I was just reminded by my wife not too long ago that for the 2 or 3 homes we've sold in our lifetime, we have always been careful to remove the pictures and hide them because we learned early on that home is less likely to sell with our brown faces being featured in the home.
Wow.
But I never ever shared that with my white brethren. I mean, people that I know dearly, I'm in a suit and tie around them, we've traveled together, we've loved together and lived together, but I've never shared that. So I'm wondering if, the lack of, conversation around those aspects of duality have hindered the conversation. Let me give one more example of that. I live with a particular neurological disease, and I live with it publicly, but I never really disclose what my life is like at home. And so when people see me, right, I'm using a cane or a wheelchair, and it's a stunning sight. So I'm learning maybe there needs to be greater conversation about bridging that duality. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. The second thing is, I'm wondering your perspective on how much the political times have hindered conversation this year. So if we took Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump out of it, and it was a bland 2019, if, we would be making more progress on these issues. And I think I'll stop there.
If I could go on the first one. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's a recent article and actually a video down in Florida, the exact same story that you just shared about the home. Can you imagine how that feels? This is where we talk about respectful empathy, not sympathy. I want you to imagine that in order for your house to sell, that you have to take down every picture and every artifact that symbolizes who you are. You have to take down all the pictures of your loved ones. You got to make sure the art is appropriate. And folks, this happens time and time again. Have we ever met, sir?
No, sir.
Okay. That's when you know it's systemic. You know it's systemic when somebody I've never met, somebody you never met, has the same exact story. That's when you know it's not just a one-off. So if you were to tell your story, people might say, oh, yeah, that kind of happened to me. I had to clean my house up a little bit in order to, no. We're talking 40, 50, 60% difference in the economics. And then that impacts how wealth is transferred from one generation to the next. So I would just tell you, so your name, sir?
My name is Clint.
Okay, so I would just say, if you need validation on Clarence's story, I will send you the video of It's Not Clarence. This is what happens time and time again. Long story short, we need to have environments where we can share these stories and hear them.
Mr. Brown, I would add one other thing to that. And my wife also pointed out that, and I say this with a good degree of, I say this with a good degree of emotion, because we never thought it was abnormal to do otherwise.
That's the scary part. Thank you.
That removing, pictures of family and loved ones who've gone on to glory, we never thought that was abnormal. And so our minds need to be reprogrammed, if you will, as to how to conduct ourselves differently in this new environment we're trying to build out.
Yes.
I'm a well-traveled, marginally educated person. And I find it stunning and deeply saddening that even a man of my, modest stature has lived that way. And I'm praying for better for my daughters, but I think it starts with my own reprogramming and boldness as to how we do things. So,
Can I share one other thing? First of all, thank you for sharing, not just the head part, but how it feels. Because that's when we've got to practice that respectful empathy. I will tell you, when Mr. Floyd was murdered, honestly, my first reaction was not a reaction. It wasn't news. It wasn't until I really realized how it was impacting my sons that it really hit me, oh my goodness. My point is, we have adapted and adopted many different behaviors to cope. And one of them was just to kind of say, well, this is just another event, another event, another event. Last thing, and I think these stories need to be told. I live in a neighborhood that's predominantly Orthodox Jewish. My sons, 3 of them, we always had the home we wanted to have our friends come to. That was one of the best advice I got. How do you make sure your sons are doing the right thing? Make sure they're at your house, and you get to see who's there, okay? My youngest son started not coming at the house anymore. I said, hey, Adam, what's happening? He said, Dad, my friends don't want to come over here anymore. I'm like, why? Every time they come over here, they get a ticket. Every time. That's the story. So we have to tell these true stories, folks. And it's not about sympathy. It's a reality of the day-to-day lives that we have that are suboptimal and have a major impact on all of us. And it really impacts us all. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, we thank both of you, too. We are sadly out of time. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, and let people know when the book will be out.
Yeah, ask Janet.
I'm done editing. I'm done.
Are you still editing? But thank you both very much. Really enjoyed it.
Wow, what a great forum for the day of our annual meeting. This was fascinating. I hope you really pulled some great information out of there. It's again, I feel like I say this often. It raised up on my list of favorite forums. So great job. So next week, September 30th, CMC is partnered with the United Way of Central Ohio to present data and discussion around diversity and leadership in the nonprofit world. I'd like to give thanks to today's sponsors, Shoemaker, Loop & Kendrick, and the American Dairy Association Mid-East, partners Central Ohio Diversity Consortium, our live stream partners PNC, Columbus Dispatch, and I forgot earlier, NBC4 and NBC4i. And then to our online virtual seat patrons, again, thank you. It's great to have you watching and helping financially support. I want to take this opportunity to just thank all the board members and past and present that are here today. It's great to see bodies in this room, and it's great to see you all in person. We've not gotten together for a while, so thank you for coming out today. And a special thanks to our speakers, Vincent R. Brown, Dr. Janet B. Reid, and of course, board member Colleen Marshall. We hope to see you again soon, but until then, be well and stay safe. Thanks.